Welcome back. Let's go ahead and get ourselves started for today. Okay. Thank you all for coming on back. Like we survived the first wave of kind of getting people enrolled in the class and getting started with some of the procedural aspects. I want to talk about a couple of those things first, just in case anyone still has questions or confusion about how to get put themselves into the class. And then today what we're really going to do is spend most of our time actually experiencing, working with building information modeling, going ahead and creating our first little models and just walking through the entire process. I'd like you to have like a little microcosm of the entire experience that will then go back and unpack and kind of keep on just adding layers of nuance and detail to it to kind of get you more and more facile in doing these sort of things. But we'll start with just kind of giving you the quick overview so that you're kind of equipped at that level. But before we dive into the material, let's kind of talk about us as a team and like what's going on here. So a couple important things that you need to know about. Okay, in terms of enrolling in the class, I think a lot of people have successfully made it through the Access system. In Access, it was originally set up with a cap. Oops, we need to look somewhere. Yeah, a little off. Hang on. You're on it, Letty. Great. There was a cap setup of 50 people, and Jill is working to alleviate that, to kind of expand that now. So if you aren't in the class yet, or you're getting some sort of message saying that things are full, just we'll let you, it'll open up again. So don't worry, everyone will get into the class. No worries, but we do want to get you enrolled as soon as possible because that gives you access to all the coursework material and into that whole system. So we'll send out an announcement as soon as we sort of figure that piece out. In our teaching team, we've actually been joined by another TA, so you should all meet, in addition to Raj, who you met last time. Here's Laddie, who's over here, kind of in the corner. And they'll be working together very closely with you throughout the kind of term. So we'll add Laddie's contact information to all the coursework site and all that stuff, so we'll know how to get a hold of him. So we'll connect that way. What else do we need to know about? Oh, in terms of just connecting to all the different materials that are available, and things that you can do outside of class. Important things to know about. Okay, if you can, just go to the coursework website. That's where I tend to distribute most of the class handouts, post the schedule, and actually have some very good links there to some of the other resources you want to know about. So get yourself into coursework. In coursework, you'll find things like updates to, we changed the time of the evening class, kind of moved a little bit earlier, which is going to affect a few people. In terms of just logistics from a facility standpoint, it looks like most of you actually brought computers today, which is great. We can talk about sort of how you're doing in terms of getting things installed. The software is available. Yes?
I wasn't here last time, but are you allowed to come to this, sometimes morning, sometimes evening?
Yes. Complete flexibility, or just go offline, or online, I should say. Okay, so for the computers, the software is working now in the lab. So if you have access to the iRoom, or if you have access to the Y2E2 cluster, and we can give you a code. In fact, there's a code on the syllabus about how you get into there to kind of complete your work. If you're here on campus and you don't have your computer, or the architecture lab, just the software is licensed and working. Okay, so we'll talk about your computers in just a second here. Actually, let's talk about them now. Why not? How are we doing from your perspective? I see a lot of computers here. So, assuming that many people have installed it, let's talk about problems people are having. Are folks having problems? Can we sort of figure out some general trends, or for the most part, are people's computers working? Yes, we got a thumbs up. Who's having troubles? Okay, some troubles, and go ahead and let's talk about some of them, see if we can kind of classify them.
Well, my baseline is I just can't find a Windows 7, the proper Windows 7 disk on campus to install Windows 7 into my machine.
Mm-hmm. Are you using Parallels, or are you using Boot Camp?
Yeah.
Okay, so we still need a Windows 7 disk for you.
Yeah, because I got an upgrade disk, but it runs and it gives me an error every time I try and install it.
So if you have the upgrade, what you'll need is actually a Windows XP disk to start with, and then you can kind of build on top of that.
Yeah.
Okay, I can point you to some.
Okay.
So let's talk about that later. Cool. Other problems people are having? Yes?
Just having a really big delay once I install Parallels and try running more than 10%.
Oh, like a really big laggy?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. That's just my
Well, how much memory do you have on your machine? Don't know.
I gave it 2 gigs to Parallels.
Oh, that's good.
So.
That should, but we'll just take a look at it. Yeah. There's always little settings and tweaking and stuff like that. what we'll probably do is just sort of set up some time, you know, either tomorrow or on Monday where people can come and bring it. If you have a problem that's happened with your machine, to bring it, and we'll kind of try and help you debug it. Yes?
I have just a quick question. Mine didn't even ask me how much memory I want to give the parallels, but it's working fine. I mean, is that...
Let's tell you how you figure that out. So everyone who's like, if you're on the Mac side and you're wondering how much memory does Parallels have, here's how it works. I'll go over to Parallels. And in Parallels, you'll actually see there's a menu up there somewhere at the top.
Mine's not, mine's meshed. It's not a separate desktop. Like I just have Windows 8 running in the background.
Oh, that'll work too. Yeah, we just need to sort of, okay, yeah, that's okay. You can go ahead and put it in coherence mode and kind of read it together. Can we get to the Parallels menu is sort of the thing. What you tend, yeah, somewhere within there, there's a menu that'll let you take, get to this configure choice. And within there, I always have to find it. I think it's under general. You can sort of see how much memory you're allocating to the machine right now. This one I have allocating 8 gigs. What will happen is it won't let you change that while the machine is up. What you have to do is stop the machine, okay, and then restart it. Okay, when you stop the machine, then you'll be able to kind of drag that slider to the left or the right. And again, you know, I sort of give it about half the machine, but as long as you have 2 gigs or more, you probably are going to be doing pretty well. So other random problems, again, we'll help people debug things. For the most part, things, you got them working. If this many people actually got it working the first time, like, well, we're golden. That's actually pretty good. So, okay, that's feeling very good. Okay, let's go back to a couple more logistic-y things. In terms of accessing course materials, so if you missed the syllabus or something like that, you'll find all that under the materials section of the coursework site, which of course you need to be in access to do. Well, actually, how about this? If you are here today, okay, and you still haven't made it into access somehow because that system still won't let you in and stuff like that, do this. Please just send me an email message. Just send an email message to glkatz@Stanford. And I can just manually put you into coursework, and you'll get a message that says, you know, as access is catching up with us. So let's do that. So everyone should have access to stuff. So access to coursework, which is sort of meta. Okay, so we'll go through and so just send me an email message, and we'll put you in there. Okay, so you'll find like slides from the last session, slides that are part of this session. You'll always find them here. Other cool sites you need to know about in terms of like kind of being able to operate with some of the course materials. There is a very fantastic site, the SCPD, so the Stanford Center for Professional Development site, which actually has all the videos from the class. So it turns out this is really a fantastic service. I had no idea how good this is because I've been recording things and putting them on YouTube, and that kind of works okay. It's good if you want to watch it on your like iPhone or your iPad or something like that. But if you have access to the web interface, go to this site. This is actually so much sexier. You can sort of see, oh, kind of what's happening with the class. You can choose a Windows Media Player or a Silverlight version. That'll work on your Mac or your PC. It has the little kind of video there, kind of all time-stamped in terms of what's going on. You can speed me up, slow me down, pause me, whatever you want to do. It's really a very, very fantastic system. So again, if you sort of either miss the class or you just take the class online, whatever it is, you get access to everything here. And the cool thing is, they post these things within 2 hours of the class being over. Okay, so like 1 o'clock on, it's all online, stuff like that. And as you're watching these things and it's going along, if, for example, you see something that's kind of interesting that you want to remember, oh, you get a really funny joke there, or he really messed up. And this would be really great to put on YouTube. Okay, go ahead and you tag it, say create a note, just timestamps it.
You're too quiet.
Club here. Okay, and you can share that or not.
I should warn you. We are being recorded, so be aware of that.
Okay. And then that's kind of a time index. So later on, if you want to go back and watch that big flub, you come back in here and it'll take you back to that point in the lecture.
No worries.
So really very cool in terms of like being able to access all this stuff. So definitely highly recommend that. Yes?
Uh-oh, that is true. I should warn you.
There is a way. I have an extension that'll let me do that, but
be aware of that.
I'm trying to think if within this interface. Let me see if I can find out the official answer to that. That says, because I have this goofy interface in there. Your interface may not have that. I have a little plug-in that I put into that always lets me grab videos. But let me find out the official answer to that.
It's kind of an interesting.
There's got to be some. Yeah, I imagine you can somehow. But we'll figure that out.
And the cameras do a good job of following.
So definitely go ahead and take advantage of the videos being there. And again, just use that. Not only to help you if you miss something in class as a way of kind of like keeping notes, but also just if you happen to miss a class, whatever. Just go ahead and be very, very free about this. Many people will be taking the class only by watching the videos, and what they do is actually so good. I don't know. It's probably about as good as being here. So I think it's actually, I'm just amazed, and thank you, Robert, and the gang in the back room for making this happen, because it's really pretty fantastic. The other site that I want you to know about is Piazza, which we are going ahead and using for the first time in this class. Let's see if it'll come up. Okay, there it is. Piazza is just a great system for exchanging information. So as opposed to sending a bunch of email, just kind of asking specific class questions, as part of getting into the whole system, we'll put you into this. It's basically a way of sharing and like peer answering and supporting each other. So anything that people ask me that's like, some little question about the assignments or just, some aspect of just the class that's a little bit confusing, I'll be watching this, Laddie and Raj will be watching this, and we'll just try and answer things. And please feel free to also jump in if you know the answer to something because you've heard it and someone's asking a question. That is, we're just going to try and support each other so everyone gets real quick feedback, just exchanges information here. So we use that for answering questions, for setting up teams when we need to. It's kind of a really good way of just connecting to everyone else in the class, kind of in a very free-form forum. So let's so know that's out there too. So that's about it for the logistics side. Any other logisticsy things, Raj or Laddie? Can you think of anything else I'm sort of missing? I'm no doubt missing something, but we'll figure it out sometime in class. How about from your perspective? Is it relatively clear about how to enroll, questions about units, all that kind of good stuff? Okay, excellent. If you are feeling good, I'm feeling good. So let's go ahead and kind of talk about what we're doing today. And what we are doing today more than anything is we are going to walk through the process of just getting started building a model. And to do that, what I'm actually going to do, I'll give you a little bit of a preview in terms of what's going on, but we'll actually dive in and spend some time in the software itself. So as we get going, one thing I just want to sort of draw your attention to is really it's this contrast between drawing and computer-aided drafting systems and building modeling, what we're doing here. And some of the big lessons that are sort of in here is this whole notion that in drafting systems, it was all about drawing and creating symbols which represented objects, but they were kind of 2D representations, things we had to sort of flatten out. We'd spend a lot of time sort of drawing things. We could, because we were sort of fairly intuitive, derive different 3D views. We could try to align things in such a way that we could put construction lines in to figure out how to create an elevation or a section or a perspective from those plan views. But it actually was a lot of work on our part to go through and try to construct those views. And we would add annotations to them, text, fills, dimensions to kind of explain what we're putting on the paper. With building modeling, the big change, as opposed to drawing symbols, you're going to start thinking about the world of modeling as placing objects, placing architectural objects. So you'll be thinking, we're putting a wall in, we're putting a door here, not actually a 2D symbol of a door, we're putting a 3D representation of a door, and all that 2D stuff's going to get taken care of for us. When it comes time to create the other views, we extract them. It's really there. The model's already there. It's just a matter of putting a camera in the right place and customizing the view to show what it is you want to show. And we still go through and add annotations. That hasn't changed. Okay, if it needs to be explained, we still need to go through and put that in there. The big advantage of working this way is that really, we can view things very, very fluidly. Okay, so we can control what's shown and how it's represented very nicely. When we create these objects, we actually just import pieces that take care of just really, everything we need to understand about how it's going to represent itself. We can pull them from libraries and really create our own objects. We have an awful lot of fluidity in terms of doing that. In terms of interacting, we're going to find today that the objects are actually pretty smart in that when they get together at a corner or a door or a window intersects a wall, or you insert some element into a wall, it takes care of a lot of the geometry for you. It cuts out things. It heals and mends the corner properly. So there's not a whole lot of cleanup. It's like if you get them joined right, things are doing good. And a really cool advantage, which is where the I in the BIM comes from, is this notion that you can actually store a lot of data in those objects. They're really just a big database of objects, and you can add as many fields as necessary to really store whatever you want. So there's a lot of information readily available about the size and the geometry, but if you are thinking about it more from a production standpoint, if you want to store the manufacturer information and the model number and the cost and what date it's going to show up on site, you can put all that stuff in there too, and it's just a big database that we can kind of query and use so we can have a shared pool of information. So really, the BIM model, the building information model, ultimately becomes, it's the central repository of every, as much of the known information about the project as we can possibly put in there. Okay, and that's where the power comes from. Okay, these objects we're going to put in are actually very smart. They function like real-world components, and they relate to each other in very real-world ways. So you'll see when you try and go ahead and put a window in right across where a wall intersects with another, it'll complain about that. It sort of understands what works and doesn't work. Okay, and they tend to be pretty smart about how they're responding to your editing. I'll warn you though, they're not completely smart in that they'll understand that you're kind of creating some sort of interference. It won't necessarily stop you from creating that interference. Okay, you're still the bottom line in deciding really whether you want to put that there. Because sometimes, as we're creating models, and it's quite common, you temporarily break things on the way to fixing things. So it'll let you kind of have these states that are really not great states to leave things in. It'll warn you about those things, and we can check those warnings, but it'll let you have things interfering, because if it didn't, it'd actually make your life very, very difficult if the world always had to resolve. So you're allowed to have unclean states. Okay. In terms of where we're going, principles you need to know. As we go, model it like you're going to build it. Okay, that's one of the big rules that we'll kind of keep on coming back to. So, it's important that you model things relatively accurately as you would build it. In the 2D world, when it was all just drawings, it didn't really matter a whole lot. As long as you could kind of make it look good and use enough whiteout and erase things, you could sort of make almost anything look good in 2D. In 3D, we're actually going to have to resolve a lot of things and really make sure they're joining properly, they're aligning properly, they're connecting. And as we do that, it's important often just to think about really how we're building things so we can model it accurately. So the hidden thing that happens in this class, we actually teach you a lot about building construction as part of the modeling process, because you really want the model to look like the way the building's going to be built. So as we're building models, we could go ahead and put in columns that go up 10 stories. Okay? But we're not going to do that because that's not the way it would actually be constructed. So we're going to learn to sort of break things into the discrete chunks that are actually going to be used as part of the building process, because ultimately someone else is going to use your model downstream who wants those elements modeled accurately. Okay, so we try to do it accurately and sort of think ahead a little bit. Another thing that we'll sort of do is always try to start with the right template. And for every assignment, I'll give you a template, which is really just a collection of, line styles and wall types and family types that will just help make that project a little bit easier. Okay, because this is really a very general purpose platform. We could start from scratch every time with a completely blank slate, but we often try to give you a little toolkit full of the types of things you may need for this project, and they'll show up in the palette for you to choose from. Okay, so it's helpful to use a template. But in terms of where we're going today, and this is the roadmap we're going to take, it's going to start with really, we're going to create a simple building. It starts by typically drawing the wall elements and putting them in. We're going to add doors and windows to those walls, put a floor underneath it, and put a roof on top of it. Okay, so that's generally where we're going. And we're going to walk through the whole process of really how you go from there to ultimately having something that looks like a series of sheet views and 2D views that sort of explain that building. Okay, so in this process, let's go ahead and think about the building we're going to model, and let's just open up Revit and start there. So if you can, please, see if you can open up the Revit application. And let's see how things go today. Okay, this is the main Revit start screen, and from here you can see there's sort of two categories of things here. There are projects where we tend to spend most of our time working. There's also families. Families are components that we can put into our projects. Okay, things like pieces of furniture, or trusses, or little elements. We'll talk more about that terminology in just a little bit. But we're going to start by creating a new project. Last time we opened this sample architecture project, and I recommend going back and taking a look at it. It's kind of a well-developed one. You can sort of play around with that. But what we're going to do is actually just say that we're going to create a new project. So here in the menu, I'll say new. You can actually also get to this from, there's this application menu. Looks like the sort of funky shaped R in the upper left-hand corner. And you'll find there's new project. And there's this notion of starting with a template. Again, the template is really just a starting point. Yeah, at any point you can bring different line types and families in from other projects, but it just gives you sort of a good starting point for the collection. And I'm going to start with an architectural template for now. Say that I'm going to create that, and let's see if we can get to something that looks like this. A lot like that. More like this. Okay, let's talk about what's going on here. This is the main Revit screen, and in the Revit screen there's a couple of different big areas you need to know about. This main area in the center is what we call the drawing area, and right now I'm looking at a floor plan view. These little guys over here are elevation markers, which are ultimately going to be used to sort of say where the elevation cameras are. Around the drawing area, there is over on the left-hand side on my screen this thing called the project browser. These are the different views or cameras or sheets that are already set up in the project, as well as the families hide under here too. So these are the elements kind of in our toolbox. This thing that's over on my right-hand side is something called the properties palette. And the properties palette is really for any individual selected object, the properties of that thing. So I sort of know I'm looking at a floor plan view because that's what it says over in the properties palette right now. Now, on your screen, it probably doesn't look like this right now. So let's tell you how you sort of fix that, or if you want to. Your screen, I am almost betting, probably looks something like this, where the properties and the project browser are kind of stacked on top of each other. That's the way it comes by default. I tend to actually like to see more of the properties palette. And there's not really much showing here, and there's a lot of scrolling of what's over there. So again, strictly if you like, no reason you have to do this, but I like to do that. You can just drag that thing, a little bit forcefully, rip it off the left-hand side. You can throw it at the top if you want. I'm going to put it over on the right-hand side. Let's see if I can get it in there. There we go. See if I can dock it over on that side. You can really move these things around into whatever order you want. This is just the way I'm going to set it up. So if you want to have your screen looking like my screen, that'll be the easiest way to do it. So again, all you have to do is kind of grab it forcefully by the title bar and just drag it off. And leave it as a floating palette, or you can kind of dock it back onto the side just by shoving it over onto the side, and it'll sort of hug up there. Other important things to know about, there's this little line down at the bottom of the screen which is really easy not to pay attention to. It's called the status bar. And as we're working, you'll learn to kind of watch that. It'll give you a lot of information about either what's selected or what Revit expects to happen next. So little messages keep on popping up down there. We'll keep an eye on that one as we go. At the top of the screen, there's this thing called the ribbon. And the ribbon, like most Microsoft applications or Windows applications now, has different commands that are contextually sensitive. It'll present different tools to you based on what it thinks you're doing right now. So in that tab, you'll notice there's an architecture tab that has things like walls, doors, windows, and things that I think of as architectural elements. There's also a structure tab, which has more structural elements, beams and columns and trusses and braces. There's a systems tab, which has ducts, pipes, electrical elements. There's some other tabs like the annotation, where we'll find things like text and dimensions, things that are considered annotations to drawings. The view tab's another popular one we'll spend some time in terms of how we create different types of views. Now, this ribbon, in general, it's pretty good about predicting what's going on. It is contextual, though, so depending upon what you have selected, different tabs may pop in and pop out of the interface. That's something to watch out for. I'll try to call out that when that's happening so you can sort of see it. The other thing you have to sort of watch out about the ribbon is it's possible to minimize the ribbon. And this will get you in trouble sometimes too. There's actually a little button right here at the top of the kind of ribbon bar. which lets you do things like shift between different modes. So the ribbon may go away completely. It looks like it's going away completely. It's actually still sort of hanging around in that if you hover over the tabs, yeah, it'll go back and kind of show you the sub options and some of the tools that are in the different panes. But you can rotate between different modes, completely minimized, fully expanded, kind of semi-minimized, almost completely minimized. This is the completely minimized view. At which point everything just looks pretty much like a menu to bring it back. So watch out for that. That's just one of those little points of confusion. You should get used to that. Okay, that'll get us going in terms of what's happening with the interface. Those are the big things to know about. Okay, again, project browser, properties palette, and a status bar. There's these little controls in here. I always call those my view controls. It'll kind of control what things look like over here. And up there at the top, kind of the ribbon. Okay. We'll play around with these guys over here, these little kind of move and zoom and control widgets. We'll play with those in just a second after we put some walls and elements in here. Okay, so to get started with, okay, most of you have this up on your screen? Look pretty good? Okay, let's go ahead and put some walls down. But for this exercise, let's have some context in mind. We're designing something. So you think about for yourself, you could be designing a doghouse, you could be designing, I'm going to be designing, some little ultra efficient house. I want some little sort of living space, maybe a 1-bedroom space. Kind of one of these extreme affordability sort of places. Maybe it can be a shelter for someone to stay in, kind of an emergency situation. Just sort of, a very small living space. Okay, maybe 500 square feet or less. Okay, but have something in mind you're designing. Okay, doesn't really matter. You could be designing something different than I'm designing right now. That's okay. But to get ourselves started, what I'll usually do is go to the Architecture tab, and we'll start with typically the Wall tool. Although I say model things the way they will be built, this is actually, I'll break my rule immediately in terms of what's going on. Architecturally, as we're designing spaces, we tend to put down walls first. We tend to think about defining the space in terms of the walls, then the floor will follow the walls. And if you're used to constructing things, you'll recognize that's not the way it goes. Typically, we put the floor and then put the walls on top of that. But architecturally, we tend to design things in terms of the wall conditions first, and then make the floor fit the walls. So that's where we're coming from. Okay. If you go to the Wall tool and choose Wall, you'll see some things change in the palette. You'll actually see also way up here on the right-hand side, it's green and it says Modify Place Wall. That means it thinks we're sort of in wall placement mode right now. And we'll see some different things that are available to us. There are some tools over here that are going to be available for helping us draw walls. We can draw walls as lines, or we can draw rectangles, which will make sort of a series of different walls that are all connected together. We can do kind of rounded walls, things like that. Here in the Properties palette, you'll see there's actually some different properties of the wall, and it's currently giving us just a generic 8-inch wall. We'll leave it like that for a minute, but we'll go through and change those too. And there's this thing up here in the options bar, which is talking about just different ways of placing the wall. If we're placing the wall, these are the options that are available. Let's talk about that for just a second. Because walls are an example of something called a system family. And we'll sort of distinguish system families and how you create them from component families. Okay. What's going to happen with a wall is basically we are going to draw a line somewhere in space, a 2D line. And on top of that 2D line, basically a 3D wall object is going to appear. So as we're relating that 2D line to the 3D wall that's going to be created, okay, a couple things need to be known. One is, as we're drawing that line, where is the wall going to show up relative to that line? Because the wall actually has thickness, and the line's only a 2D object. So we have the choice. We could have the wall show up on the inside of the line. We could have, oops, and you'll learn really quickly, I'm very bad at drawing in 3D. We could have the wall show up on the outside of the line. Okay. Or we could actually have the wall show up, somewhere in the middle, just partway on each side of the line. Okay, and that's this notion of this line and how the wall relates to it. That's called the wall location line. Okay, and we'll learn to be careful about that. By default, it tends to put things where the wall is built centered on the line, but we'll learn that it's actually important to control that. because as we're building things, that placement line is actually related to how things are going to be constructed. For today, we may leave them at the center. Next time, we're going to actually learn why it's actually typically a smarter choice to put that line at what's called the core of the wall, which is the structural boundary. Because when we actually build walls, we tend to actually build some structural layer, whether it's the wood framing the studs or the concrete blocks that are inside. And you learn to think of walls as actually having all these layers, where some layers are finished layers on the outside of that core, things that are finished layers on the inside of the core. But the core is really the, where you tend to place walls, but we'll play with that more next time. The other thing we have to worry about is really how high is this thing? It's really how high is it going up? And by default, it creates something called an unconnected wall that's 20 feet tall. Okay, why not? Okay. A better thing to do might be, though, to actually say, this wall is not just sort of an arbitrary 20 feet. It actually connects to something else. Okay, and that's what we'll learn to actually choose what's called a top constraint for the wall. And what I'll do for these walls is I'll bring them up to just level 2. And you might ask what level 2 is. Well, it's actually just sort of a height somewhere above the ground plane. We'll link our walls to level 2, and then we'll figure out that actually we can sort of move level 2 around a little bit. But it's just sort of a parameter that we'll tie things to. Okay, so let's get going with that. We'll start by saying, great, we're going to go through and place our wall. Here's the notion of the location line. And I'll just leave it at the center for now. Again, we'll learn to talk about why that should either be at the finished faces, at the outer edges, or the core faces. Okay, that's the structural layers in the middle. Okay. We'll also talk about sort of the height of the wall, and do we want it to go up to level 1, level 2, or stay disconnected. And since I am placing a wall on level 1, I'll have it go up to level 2. Okay, you're ready to draw now. So go ahead and let's just start with this guy over here, which is just the line drawing tool. And start drawing some walls. As you drag out your walls, notice that we're getting some dimensions. Okay. Don't worry about those dimensions too awfully much just yet. I'll kind of pull out to, kind of around 20 feet. Notice it's kind of sticky. There's this chain command that's turned on right now. That's making it stick as I keep on going. Oh, the chain command, it's this little button right up in here. See what's going on. There's this funny thing, I keep on making this mistake of installing Maya, which is causing mine to do this every time. It keeps on trying to reinstall pieces of Revit. Hopefully you're not getting this thing where it's doing that now. I'm going to patiently put up with it for a minute and see if I can get out past this. You think I'd learn after a while not to change my machine between classes, but I keep on changing things. Oh, was it? The chain command really, as we're drawing line segments, it says, keep on following me. So it's like having gum stuck to your shoe. Okay, it'll just keep on going and chaining those walls together. Let's see if I can make it through this far enough. And then I'm going to curse myself for having played with my machine's configuration right before class again. Don't do that, don't do that. Okay. Why don't you, as this is doing it, go ahead and kind of just complete some walls. Go all the way around the circle if you can. And I'll let this kind of cook for just a second. We'll talk about really what's going on. So basically, as you're going through and adding walls to your model, it starts with this notion of basically just choosing some properties, a wall type, and choosing the height. And then we're just going to go drawing walls. Now, let's talk about that for a second in terms of drawing walls. We'll give you a sort of, as we're drawing generic walls, it really doesn't matter very much in which order you go. Okay, actually, let's talk about the notion of counterclockwise versus clockwise. Okay, so if you're looking down, okay, like on the podium or on your screen, okay, going this way, okay, is what I consider the counterclockwise, or clockwise versus counterclockwise. And where that makes a difference actually is in the notion of really what's considered the inside versus the outside of the wall. Okay, so if I come around this way, okay, what's happening is everything here, this is the outside, and that's considered the inside face. So if I go that way, okay, it gets things in the proper order. If I draw walls this way, The weird thing happens is that what you'd think of as the inside face shows up on the outside. Okay? Because really, there always is some notion of really what the inside and the outside of the wall is, but that'll make more sense actually if I show it to you. You generally want to draw clockwise. Let me just try canceling that and see if I can get out of this for a second, because this is really going to make the demonstration be really bad. Come on, you. Okay. Pardon me for, well, let's see what you're going to do there. I'm the eternal optimist that eventually things will work out. But I'm also a little cautious in that I carry spare copies. So if this thing's going to fight with me, I'm going to fight with it. Let's see if we can get past this step. Nope, 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 nope. Okay, hang on. Yes, no, maybe. Oh, gee. See, it goes to this thing where it seems to like want to do this 15 times. Well, keep your eyes open. We'll see what's going on here. I don't trust it. Remind me at break to swap something else in. Okay, so we're drawing some walls, and this is what I mean by drawing clockwise. So I'm going around this way, I'm going around that way. Notice as I'm drawing, these little things called inference lines pop up. That's because I'm actually sort of adjacent, or I'm lining up with something else in the model right now. Let me go ahead and close that. Hopefully that looks pretty good. Now, I've drawn some walls here. You say, great, those are 2D walls. I sort of understand it, put some line thickness in there, but I'm not seeing them in 3D. And if you'd like to see them in 3D, here's how we do it. Up in the top of the menu bar, you'll actually find this little thing that looks like a tiny little house. That opens what's called the default 3D view. And if you choose it, okay, it'll give you a 3D view of what you've just done. Okay, and that's not too bad. I'd like to kind of look at the 2D view and the 3D view and kind of see those two things together. And that would be a very useful thing to turn on. So how we actually do that is there's always a series of different windows that are open. If you want to see several windows simultaneously, we're going to do something called tiling the windows. Okay, and you can do that by going to the View tab. I can choose, there's a tile tool right here. That'll just organize things so that the two different windows are side by side. Actually, let me give you another sort of like shortcut as we're here. Notice with every command, there's actually this thing, keyboard shortcut. And you'll see after tile windows, it says WT there. It's a mnemonic way of trying to give you something that looks like tiling the windows. So if you actually just type WT, it'll tile the windows too. So for every command, as I keep on repeating them, if you feel better just typing things, just go ahead and type those shortcuts instead.
Is there a shortcut for like a pan tool?
The pan tool. Yes, there is, as a matter of fact. If you happen to have a mouse handy, okay, that'll actually make it the easiest if you have your mouse handy. A lot of it works with, it's just a mouse and the continual scroll. The pan tool, that works like this. If you have your mouse and you hold that down, let's see, let me try this. I hold down the wheel, it changes to the pan tool. Let me try that just with my keyboard and see what's going on here. Is it shift is zooming up and down, hang on.
And you can scroll, but...
Yeah, let me show you the other way to do it. And this is always especially weird because I am on the Mac, which sort of remaps my keys in a funny way. The way to sort of get to panning, if we want to do that, let's see over here. You can scroll. The mouse is easiest. Hang on, that's the zoom tool. Trying to see the 2D wheel. Let's see what we got in here. Okay, this little guy over here, okay, is called the steering wheel. It used to be called the steering wheel, it may not be anymore. It brings up something that gives you a lot of different controls, including pan. So that's kind of compensation for if you don't have a mouse, kind of how you can work with that. So again, how I got to that again was, let me escape and get out of there. I click on the little guy up there. It brings up a tool where I can pan. Zooming would let me roll up and down, panning. Rewind's kind of an interesting one. Rewind will take you back. If you ever sort of get your screen in a really funny state and you really wish you were where you were about 30 seconds ago, okay, rewind will let you sort of see, where it was in the past. And you can sort of go back to some position that feels a little more comfortable to you. Okay, so let's do the same sort of thing over here. I'm over in this side. And for here, I could zoom. Let me zoom on in or out. Maybe I'll pan, kind of bring them in together just so you can see them both. And what I usually do is hit the escape key to get out of that. So we got a 2D representation, a 3D representation of the walls. So far, so good. Now, as we go through and place our walls, you'll notice I'm actually pretty casual about placing them. I'm not really very precise because I know since these are all objects, I can go ahead and move them around very quickly later. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and, back in the 2D view, choose any of those walls. Notice that the wall is selected both in the 3D and the 2D view. And if I want to, I can just drag the wall. You can do it in the 3D view. So what you can do is over here, choose it, drag it. Okay? And notice they all stay kind of completely interlinked with each other. Now in the 2D view, kind of a cool thing that happens is when you choose a wall, you get these things called temporary dimensions. And the temporary dimensions are actually giving us some indication about how big things are relative to the other things around them. The way temporary dimensions work, just so you know, is it will go ahead and give you the position of whatever the highlighted object is. And if you change either of the dimensions, it'll move that highlighted object. So let's think about what that actually means. This thing right now, I can tell, is somewhere around like 54 feet wide or something like that. So if I go through and change dimensions, let's watch the effect. Currently, I have this middle wall selected. So if I go through and I change that by clicking on it and typing in a new number like 20, okay, it'll move the middle wall. Okay, because it'll always move whatever the selected object is. Let me Control Z to get back out of there. So again, if I select the middle wall and I change the dimension, it'll move the middle wall. If on the other hand, this is what confuses people, same situation, but I select that one, if I choose 20, it'll move that side over. Okay, so always be aware, the changes you make are always to the selected objects. Okay, so we can change a lot of things about walls. We can change the location either by dragging or by putting in dimensions. That actually works out pretty well. The other things we can change about the wall, you could go ahead and change aspects of their height. For example, if you choose one of the 3D walls here, I could just drag the wall up. You'll see it changes over here in the palette too. Or if I want to, I can just put in a numerical value there, like I want that to be 3 feet taller. Okay, so again, completely interlinked in terms of what's going on. The other aspect of a wall that's kind of interesting, though, is that you can change its properties. You can change actually the layering and the materials that the walls are constructed out of. And that's where it gets sort of interesting, where the location line starts to be important. Let's see if we can do that without my machine blowing up on me. So what we'll do is I'll take that front wall there, and I'll try changing its type. So it's currently something called a generic 8-inch wall. So some mystery material, but 8 inches thick of it. And if I roll on down through the menu, you'll see some different choices. I'm going to go through and choose, kind of a big fat wall construction, brick on metal studs, which is actually pretty similar to some of what we build around here. So I'll choose that. Now, that was kind of subtle. You may not have noticed the difference, but what happened over here is one wall got fat, and the other ones kind of stayed relatively constant. So this is the brick wall. This over here is the basic wall here. It may be hard to notice, but actually over here in the 3D window, and what I'm going to do is choose the little zoomer and kind of zoom in on over there. It's also a little bit different over here. Now, it's kind of hard to see because it's all just black and white right now. If you prefer, I tend to like to shade my drawings. I give them a little bit of color because the color information helps me figure out what's going on. So by default, this is all just showing up the hidden line view, which is black and white. We can use these little controls here at the bottom to go through and change how these appear to us. So for example, there's a tool right here which lets us choose, well, here's the scale of the drawing. Won't be important until we actually print it out. Right next to it's something called the level of detail. We'll play with that one in a second. There's this visual style one. So right now it's hidden line. If I want to say shaded, it'll go through and give me some color. I could say realistic colors if I want to. And let me go back to shaded. Or consistent colors. That'll maybe be a little bit easier for what we're doing right now. The brick wall is looking a little bit dark right now because of where the sun's positioned. So you couldn't really see the difference. Consistent colors will let you see it. So here we're seeing the brick wall, the generic wall. Yes?
Where do we change the thickness of the wall?
The thickness actually is changed just by choosing a wall. And then when you have that wall selected in the properties palette, there's the notion of choosing a type of wall. So you can choose one of the existing ones. Let me change it to a different one, like brick on CMU on metal studs, which will make it even fatter. Okay. Notice this wall is even groovier. It's got like some kind of stone at the bottom. It's got some sort of reveals that are cut into it. It's got a nice brick cornice to it. We're getting a lot of mileage in here just for making one single menu choice. But that's the way we're going to basically roll with this, is that we're going to go through and just choose different types, set those up smartly, and then let it wrap to the geometry. Yeah?
If you want to create your own wall type, you have to make that in a different file, save it as like an object, and then somehow work it.
Well, it's actually, yeah, you can create them in any file, and then we can share them amongst different projects. But this is, in fact, where we're going to go next time, is let's go ahead and just choose that wall type, just so you sort of see. This is the 3D generic wall. It's not very interesting. Let me go ahead and choose this one over here. The wall type, if I say edit the type, actually has a whole something called the structure to it, which is all the different layers and thickness and how it's defined. So what we're going to do next time is we're going to learn how to say, hey, great, we got these standard wall types. We can pick any of those just out of the library. But if we want to go through and create our own constructions, you know, this is where we're going to start changing it. Okay, so you're right on target. And then once you go through and create your favorite wall types, this gets to be one of those ones where you'd kind of like to put that into a template so that other people in the firm can go ahead and grab that without having to redefine them. So you're heading right in the right direction. That's exactly where we're going to be going. Okay, now, in this little wall over here, you'll notice you really can't see very much detail in terms of what's going on. So there is this notion also for each of these views of how much detail to show, how many layers of detail, how much, and the idea is this. You start taking a small little model like this, doesn't really matter, our machines can keep up with it, you know, it's okay in terms of being able to render it very quickly. If I started having a 100-story tower, there might be a lot of graphical information to represent. So maybe I don't really, and if I'm going to be looking at this tower from half a mile away, I probably don't need to see every individual brick. Okay? So there's this idea of how much detail to present to you. And it's really only a rendering thing. It's the model still contains all that detail. But what you can do in any view is go through and choose, it's the first of the little view controls. It's called the detail level, and switch between coarse, medium, and fine. Coarse being the least amount of information, give you the main outlines, but not really get to the detail of how it's all constructed. Medium giving you somewhat more, and fine actually giving you everything. And the reason I'm showing that to you is just that in terms of this wall, the difference is, for example, coarse just shows it to you as kind of a single line representation. Okay? Whereas if we actually start showing the levels of detail, then we can start to see it's got a brick layer, it's got an insulation layer, a sheathing layer, a stud layer, and all those different layers. Okay, so you can go ahead and on any wall, for example, that wall over there, let me go ahead and change it. I can change it to also this brick on metal studs. You might notice something actually sort of smart happened down over here. When I change the wall type, they actually got kind of smart around the notion that brick was going to be the outer layer. Maybe that brick will wrap around and join. So that's actually what's happening here. Same thing with the sheathing layer. Yeah. Walls are pretty smart about trying to figure out how the layers are going to intersect, and you can really set that up as part of your layer definitions. There's a whole hierarchy to which things should join and which things shouldn't join. But in general, it tends to be pretty smart about what's going on. Now, the other thing I want to show you that just has to sort of do with this counterclockwise, clockwise thing is this. These generic walls don't really have much of a notion of inside or outside. It doesn't really matter. They're pretty much the same. This brick wall actually does. There's sort of a different surface on the outside from the inside. Okay? And for any wall, when you click it, you'll actually see there's this little glyph that shows up, which lets you flip the orientation. Every wall has an orientation inside and outside, which it considers inside and outside. So if you choose a wall and you flip it, okay, watch over here. It flips the material kind of in the other view too. You can also sort of see that down here in the plan view, it's kind of flipped around. So you can always flip walls. So why do I tell you that? Because invariably when you're putting down walls, you'll end up with some where the inside's on the outside or vice versa, and you just need to flip them, and that's okay. You can always go through and just change them around after the fact. But let me warn you about this. How a wall flips is kind of interesting. It'll flip actually relative to the location line. Okay, so if the location line is the center line of the wall, it'll flip but stay in the same place. If the location line's actually one of the outer edges of the wall, when the wall flips, it's not only, it's going to reposition it relative to that 2D line. So if it was all on the outside and you flip the wall, it's going to all flip over to the inside. Okay? So we'll learn next time about how you can sort of change the location line after you place something so that when things flip, you don't radically change the dimensions of the building. Okay, so, but yeah, nuance. We'll get to that. Okay. So as you're going through and drawing walls, you put walls in, you choose types, you choose heights, things tend to be pretty good. Okay, the other thing about walls though, that we sort of played around with the height over here, let's talk about that for just a second. Because you saw, I could come back over here and just, pull that wall up or pull that wall down. That was actually kind of okay in terms of just stretching that wall. Let's talk about, we hung this wall on level 2. What does that level 2 actually mean? And the way to understand the levels is to actually shift over to one of the elevation views. So go ahead and, actually, no matter which elevation view, let's just open up one of those. For some reason, I always open the south view. Again, there's no particular reason. It's just always the one that I do. I have another window open. I can tile that into the scheme if I want to, by either typing WT or going to the View tab and tiling that in there. Let me zoom this up a little bit. Okay. You notice there's 2 levels, level 1 and level 2 right now. 0 for level 1, 10 feet higher for level 2. So here's where the parametric properties become interesting. If we change level 2, okay, the model will stretch accordingly. So, for example, if I choose level 2, and I can either just push it up and down, okay, or I can click on the number and type in a different number, like 16. Okay, watch what happens over here. This building down here is stretching, it's raising, it's lowering, it's going ahead changing too. And that's why we'd actually like to go through and actually have the walls positioned by level 2. If you hang that parametric relationship in there and sort of dictate the wall that way, as opposed to saying 10 feet or 15 feet, the nice thing is later on in our design, if level 2 has to change, the building will adapt itself smartly. Okay, so that's where levels play into this. What's that? That little lock over there? That little lock is actually sort of indicating that just the end point, okay, of this level line is tied to that one there. And what that does for us is, if you can actually there's this little circle on the end of the line there. If I pull them around, they'll sort of move together. So we're going to start locking things together. When it can, if it sort of can infer a relationship that something seems to be related to each other and should follow each other, it'll suggest locking it. Okay, so how are walls feeling? Walls feeling pretty good? Okay, if walls are feeling pretty good, let's go ahead. Okay, now walls are a system family. Let me distinguish this between that and what we're about to put in there. System families as a class, here's what I mean by system family. System families aren't discrete objects. System families tend to be things where you draw either a line or a boundary, something that's going to dictate where it will be placed. And rather than just sort of pulling one out of its pocket, it goes through and uses a definition to create something that fills that boundary. So in this case, there's a wall definition of how many layers and how many tall. And as we go stretching the line out, it'll basically just draw a wall wherever we draw that line. Okay. Now, I'll distinguish that from what we're about to do, which is called a Revit component family. And components are individual discrete objects. Okay, and we create them a little bit differently. System families, we choose a type and draw some geometry, boom, it creates it. Component families, we sort of go out to the library and we pull one in that we like, and if it looks good, we drop it into the model. But they're really sort of discrete, separate chunks, as opposed to something that will sort of stretch arbitrarily. Okay, we can change them around a lot, but that's how we get started. So let's show you how windows go and get you started there, then we'll go ahead and take our break. So windows, which is what I typically put into a building next, are under the architecture tab also. You'll find them kind of hanging out right there. And when you choose window, some things are pretty much the same. Okay. We have this notion of really what type of windows in here. And my library, or my project's pretty boring here. The only type of window it has in here right now is a fixed window. So one that doesn't swing, it's not a casement, or it's not a slider or something like that. It's just sort of a fixed window, a fixed piece of glass that has a frame. We have some different sizes in there. Let's go ahead and just start with choosing one of those. We'll say, hey, let's go ahead and grab, that 36 by 48 is fine. That's 36 inches wide, 48 inches tall. And I can go ahead and place that window in here. And here's how placing windows works. If you go through and place a window in a floor plan view, you'll sort of see it kind of ghosted in there. I can't just place a window in the middle space. A window has to be hosted in a wall. So if I hover over a wall somewhere, it'll actually show that I could place it. Now, windows have this notion. We're going to drop it in here. Windows sort of have an inside and an outside too. And the way you place windows, you place them, just on the outside edge. Okay, you sort of place the outside where you want that to be. And again, don't worry. If it's wrong, we'll flip it. So I can go ahead and place a window in here. Place a window right next door. Place a third window over here. You will notice as I am placing all these windows, they're actually showing up down here in the 3D view also. So these windows are all interrelated. If I go through and move that window, for example, here's the window. I can just drag it around. Notice a couple different things happen. Yeah, it's doing a pretty good job of cleaning up the 2D view over here. It's taking care of where the wall intersection is and making sure the lines all look good. It's moving the window over here in the 3D view. It's kind of doing a pretty good job of taking care of itself, but we're just going to treat it as a window object. Let's go ahead and say, that 48-inch tall window is not quite what I had in mind. How about a 72-inch tall window? And again, we've got to put it in there. Notice for every window there are some properties. There's the type. There's also this notion of the height of the window. What is the sill height? And we can determine windows. We can say either the head height or the sill height. The truth is, the way we build and design a lot of things here in the U.S., we tend to actually determine, we describe windows typically by their head height. And very often the head height is consistent. So we'll have, if all the windows are at 6'8" or 7 feet off the ground, all the tops of the windows will be relatively even with each other. So if we wanted to do something like that, we could go through and adjust the head height of this to like 6'8". Okay, and it dropped it down a little bit there. Now, if you got a bunch of windows and you'd like to have them all at 6'8" or some height above the floor, what you can do is actually choose one. It's in the properties palette. I can actually control click, and I'll apologize for that. It's kind of the opposite of what I expect. I want it to be shift click, but it's control click to select more than one things. I can get several different windows. Notice right now it's not listing a head height, and the reason it's not is for this selection of these three windows, there's not a single value. It's actually what I'll call an uneven selection. Things are a little bit different between the two. So anything that it has in common, all three of these windows have level 1 in common, that's showing, but the other properties are a little bit different. So what will happen is as soon as I put a property in here, it'll apply it to all three of those. So I'll come on in here and I'll say, those all want to be maybe 7'0". And let me tell you about that for just a second. As you're putting dimensions in Revit, you have a lot of ways to do this. You could put 7 single quote dash 0 double quote, but you're just sort of spending more time typing than you need to. You could also put 7 dash 0. You don't need the quotes. It'll always be presumed that the first number is feet, the second number is inches. If we're in feet and inches, if we're working in millimeters, it'll sort of be relative to whatever the unit system is. Okay. But as we're putting it in, the quickest way is actually just 7 space 0, that's 7'0". If I wanted to do 7'2" or 7'6", I got a lot of options. Not to confuse it, now I could put in 7'6", that would work. See if you get this one. Okay, that'll work too, 7'5". I could also go ahead and put in there, that'll work too. Any of those things are really the same dimension. It'll do the math. Yeah?
So I noticed there's also a sill height.
Mm-hmm.
Because the window is a fixed dimension, if you put in a sill height and head height that don't give you enough room in between, will it let you know?
Now, what it'll do is sill height and head height, one will dominate. So you put the sill height, you put the head height. You know, it'll
It'll record that for later when you like flash.
well, what it'll do is now it'll actually, because it's a 48-inch tall piece, you can determine either the top or the bottom. Okay, but that'll dominate. That 48 inches will move up or down as necessary. If you actually want something that's different, you know, we want something that's 42 inches instead, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're actually going to create a new type. And actually, let's do that right after the break. We'll start by creating a new type and show you how to do that. The other, so if you want to play around, if we're taking the break, let's try putting some windows in the other wall. Say window, and if you want to, you can go ahead and place them in 3D. As you're placing in 3D, you may be a little bit off on your sill heights and your head heights, but you can adjust those after the fact. But if I know that I just want to go through and put some windows in, go dropping them in 3D, see what that's like. Notice it's actually pretty interesting about what it does. Not only did it put the window in there, but cancel there right now. It's actually being pretty smart. It's not only putting the window in the frame of the window, it's actually going through and cutting out that stone, sort of arranging the brick. It's doing a lot of work for us in terms of what's going on. And again, if that window's not quite right, I can move it up. I can move it down. It's pretty smart about what's going to happen there. It'll take care of a lot of that. And that's really the principle I want to leave you with. It's really that, you know, you're going to think about this as a designer placing objects, and you're going to let it take care of all the drafting that's happening in the background. Okay? Let's go ahead and break now. And when we come on back, we'll sort of play around some more with windows and put some doors in, which you're going to find out are just like windows, except what's the difference with doors? They're typically at the ground level. Doors are very, very similar. If you got windows, you got doors. Okay, so come on back. It's 10:06 right now. See if you can get yourself back. Oh, we're a little behind. Say 10:15. Okay?